Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome once again. We're excited to bring back the KoreSummit starting 2024. Right off the bat, we're in the second week of January, Dr. Kiran, and we're already getting started. So it's pretty. We're getting ready for an exciting year of bringing more of these educational series to everyone, from blockchain to investors in the private capital market. It's really exciting. So, but before we get started this morning, first of all, we need to thank our sponsors for making this happen for us. Nuvei, leading payment acquirer around the world in 180 countries, may I add. And then, of course, KoreChain, the leading blockchain company for the private capital markets. So today we are dealing with an exciting topic that, obviously it's like anything else. It's all about timing. And right now, Dr. Kiran and myself, we're gonna kind of just bring everyone to an understanding, why are we talking about FTX and Binance in the private capital market? So Dr. Kiran, well, I should say Dr. Kiran Garimella. I'm sorry to call you Dr. Kiran.
Oh, that's all right. I'm fine with Dr. Kiran. That's good. Thank you.
Are you? Okay, fantastic. So let's start off by, let's just bring everybody to light on FTX and Binance, who they are and where we at with them today. Obviously, the importance of this discussion we're going to have.
Absolutely. And it's a very timely discussion too, Oscar, as you mentioned. There are so many interesting things that are happening in this space, and people are testing various things, but there are some things that are perennial. You look at major scandals over the decades, financial scandals that have been going on since time immemorial, I would say, right? And they just keep repeating over and over in multiple different forms. And I think our discussion today really should be focusing on what are some root causes of that, and how best can we position ourselves, not just us as a company or companies, but all of us individually in this space to avoid something like this, right? It's all about trust. I mean, this is the decade of trust.
So, I mean, I'm not here to, and obviously there's enough information out there for all the people listening in. We all see FTX unfolding itself, but I see it in two different ways for the breakdown. The breakdown came down to, compliance and trust, and I think that comes with it. I mean, in order for the general audience, the general public to gain more adaptability to the crypto market, they need to have that trust. And if you're not being compliant, it became evident, and here is the breakdown that has occurred. And we'll let the regulators sort that out and everybody else. But from the private capital market, that's the reason why we're having this discussion this morning.
Yes.
What happened at FTX and Binance, it's like a ripple effect. It's not just a bubble isolated by itself. It has an effect. So we know it's compliance and trust, but how does that then come back to where we are now within the private markets?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's this analogy of a butterfly flapping its wings in Iowa, and it causes a tsunami in Japan, right? It's one of those little catastrophic chain of events. So 100% I agree with you. I mean, this is, in one sense, Oscar, I have to feel that in one way it is timely. It's unfortunate, it affected so many people negatively, people lost money and all that. But at the same time, we kind of sit back and say, okay, what is this? How does this help us in the private capital markets to strengthen this entire ecosystem, right? That's how, I mean, I would look at it from a very positive way. I mean, it's a lesson that we have to learn.
Well, we do. I mean, it's, but it did have a ripple effect. In the initial stage when it all started, we saw how the regulators instantaneously, provided a guidance that they didn't want any of the broker dealers or anyone dealing with anything with crypto. So FTX was isolated in one area, but it did have a ripple effect in the private markets where it created this kind of level of uncertainty as to what role it could play in the private markets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the special things that happened in this particular space, we talk about, SBF and FTX finance and all this. I think the special situation here is really on the cryptocurrencies, right? And there are so many ways that a blockchain can help in this particular instance. But, some of these innovators chose to go the other way, where they use the technology for a very different purpose in one sense, right? And then they build all these corporate structures around that to move monies and hide and create, lack of transparency is classic in these situations. So I think there are many things to unravel from this, but at the end of the day, the solution is actually pretty simple, right? I mean, it's, and we'll talk more about, we'll get into some of the depths of, what the right infrastructure of trust would really mean in this particular space, right?
Well, it is the infrastructure of trust. And it's, I look back when we started talking about this and where it was creating this kind of chaos and everything. And now it's so timely because none of us could have predicted that the trial for this went as quickly as it did. And during the time that it was on trial, it started providing this clarity, which was really important, that if the crypto market was going to keep moving forward, it needed to be compliant. And it needed to be compliant because it needed to establish that trust. That trust is so important because of billions of dollars that have been lost in there. And obviously, we're going to bring this back to the private capital markets for the discussion that we're having today. But the reminder, the stark reminder here is that for everyone is that even though this happened in not so much isolated, but nothing related to private, it is related to the private capital markets because we saw how regulators reacted. We saw how regulators did not want this participation. We saw how regulators did not want anyone engaging using these kind of form of currency, or they didn't want the broker dealers touching it, even though it was 10 miles away. It became all these warning signs. So it created a major standstill in the industry, I would say, for almost nearly a year, where uncertainty as to what are we going to do going forward.
Yes.
And in December, obviously, that uncertainty came to an end with the decisions by the courts or the juries and so on. Which again, we're not here to judge any of that, but now we need to look going forward and what the impact of this will have in the private markets.
No, absolutely. And I think part of the reason, I just want to highlight one important point. There's this whole cryptocurrency phenomenon, right? It's well known. And there are a lot of innovations happening in the cryptocurrency space. And some of the motivations for the innovations have really been how to, well, not so much as how to, but testing the boundaries of what can and cannot be done. To create one type of solution, which is probably one of those libertarian, hey, leave me alone, I do not want any regulation kind of atmosphere. And now you get into, okay, so now that you created all this and somebody hacked into your cryptos and just stole all this stuff, what do? You go running back to Uncle Sam and saying, help me out here. So here's a weird situation where people are, in one sense, investing or playing in a space that they don't want to be regulated. And when bad things happen, now they want the regulators to step in and then help them out. So I find that very ironical, to put it very mildly, how people are perceiving some of that, right? But as we kind of dig into this one, I just want to say, Can you, Oscar, I think it'd be helpful if you can provide maybe an overview of some of the legal challenges that these companies have faced, and what are some potential consequences of exchanges in this type of a market?
Well, I mean, look, we're not in the crypto space, but I'm just making it clear that, you know, up until recently, it was kind of like a free for all. Everybody was doing their own thing. They use words like IDNA and KYC, but there was no standardization, and we've seen that. So neither here or there. The point is, going forward, what do we see? We see there's a clear signal that things are changing. There's a new CEO of Binance. There's a new owner coming for FTX, and we know that it will be fully compliant. We've seen Commissioner Gessler already endorsing who could potentially be the new owner. So what that means is that going forward operationally, you know, as I was just talking to a client yesterday, they go, well, you know, Oscar, I'm thinking of going to offshore and, you know, to another jurisdiction to do this. And I go, it won't matter anymore, because what is happening is you're now starting seeing the convergence of what you had hoped for. And that is, you wanted the adoption of a global economy. You wanted the adoption by the general public. You want the adoption of the banks. You want all that. In order for that to occur, everybody, you know, it's a understanding that in order to work with that party, you need to be fully compliant. You need to do background checks. You need to do this. You need to do that. There's certain things you need to do operationally to make sure you're not putting people at risk. You're making sure that there's nothing there's a back door for people to do malicious activities and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So, I mean, look, I'm not gonna say that technology is always going to be a bulletproof to finding fraudsters. It's definitely making it easier now using blockchain. It's kind of hard. I mean, that's the whole thesis of the technology. No matter how smart you are, there's always somebody smarter. But I think it's look, where we got today, obviously, it took a long call for that visibility, for the whole world to see it. I think the crypto market for 2024 is going to be on an upswing. Just for everybody's sake, I don't own any crypto. I don't own any form of currencies or anything like that. I make this prediction purely on the thesis that if you see the rest of the market who is eager to come in, when you see different forms of industries who are saying, hey, we want this adoption, we want it, but they have rules and regulations they need to follow, and the other side say, well, we don't do that. Well, that is now going to change, and that ripple effect is going to be from, you know, the other day somebody asked me, how many of the currencies do you think will survive in the market? I think maybe the top 10, 15, maybe 20% of them, the rest of them will die. So if you got one of those cryptocurrencies that's not in the top 20, start converting, because you know, the exchanges, in order to maintain their business and to be compliant and to be operationally what they want to do globally, they will give a grace period for those providers to get themselves compliant. If not, boom, they're going to get booted down. So what does that mean? You're going to boot it down further down the hole, which means your currency that you got will only be, you know, in a very small island. That island that they had that was global is now gone. That island, in fact, I saw it in a recent blockchain advertising for a crypto summit that, you know, one jurisdiction at a time. What does that mean? You're being fully compliant one jurisdiction at a time, and that's the right approach. So that brings us to, you know, to talking today about the private markets, right? How does that affect the private capital markets? And that's been really the most important thing that we've been looking at is, even though we're in the private capital markets, we're in the selling of securities where investors come in and to be able to invest in them. And, you know, crypto has played a role. Whether people realize it or not, there have been people who have crypto who wish to use it and be able to buy those securities, and be able to use their crypto. And up until recently, like you said, the last year or so, this is going to open it up. So that's one element of it. But the other element is that there's going to be rules now for companies who wish to accept crypto when they're engaged in this business. And, yes, there are rules going to have to be played in order to protect investors' investment, but overall, this is where we're now heading, is that the impact of FTX and Binance in the private markets, as much as it was negative in the last year or so, it's going to be extremely positive because it's providing for the very first time the gateway, a compliant way for one, using it as a currency, one, but two, what everybody has really been hoping for, dreaming for, is to trade security tokens, digital securities, NFTs, and all that fully compliantly.
That brings up a very good point. I mean, I know we are not like a cryptocurrency ecosystem necessarily in the private capital markets, even though there is a marginal overlap on that one. I think the issue really is the whole cryptocurrency market and the whole cryptocurrency phenomenon is really a way to create a different type of a payment instrument for, transfer of goods and services, right? I mean, it's a payment instrument. And what's happened with that is they've taken a payment instrument and extended the scope and functionality of that to cover securities, which are an entirely different type of a financial instrument. And that's where much of the confusion arises. On the one hand, on the method of payment and how people pay for this is one aspect of that. And where it impacts the private capital markets is that how can we be sure that the funds being used to purchase securities are actually obtained non-fraudulently, right? So this whole anti-money laundering effect that goes into play here. So when these two concepts get conflated, I mean, I've talked to so many people in this space, and like you, Oscar, I come from the finance background myself. I used to be a trader myself, and people really get confused about things such as payment instruments versus securities instruments, and they try to treat both of them as if they are the same, but they're not. One is a bearer instrument, the currency instrument, the securities are non-bearer instruments. There are different rules and regulations of how securities can exchange hands in different jurisdictions. That is not true for currency, right? I mean, currency, you can freely exchange it within a broad regional jurisdiction without any problem. But you can't do the same thing with securities. There are blue sky laws and local jurisdictions. There's regulations of various kinds that impact it, right? So I think being able to understand that type of dynamic is very, very important for the financial in the private capital markets as well, right, Oscar?
It is. I'm so optimistic on this, and like I said, even though I'm optimistic, I'm not buying it because I want to make sure that my comments are brought up based on what I see and what's happening in the market, and I'm excited about this. I mean, I think what happened at FTX and Binance was an unfortunate event, but it exposed the weakness. Had the right controls been in place, we wouldn't be having this discussion and so on. But now that we are, we got to look at it, the positive impact, and that's all I've been thinking about. I mean, look, anytime there is chaos, there is which was for the last year, people like, what's going to happen? Who's going to do this? This is shutting down crypto. It's not. Crypto's going to live. I think we've all understood that this is really a new form of currency. We're not doubting that. But what we did need to make sure that was in place, and I think the regulators gave the right amount of bandwidth to everyone to say, okay, so this technology can govern. Oh, fantastic! Show us. And that was the problem. Whenever people said that it could, it never did. Why? Because we're human beings. We control the governance. We create the governance and all these different things. And as human beings, I'm sorry, we're flawed. We have a flaw in our. You could have 10 people in the room, and 10 different people will describe good governance in a different way, depending on their background, experience, and what they feel is fair or not fair. And that rule base is the problem why we have this issue. So I think we still need to have that regulatory oversight until we can we can start learning to properly, put these things in place. But in the meantime, I think it's extremely positive for the overall market. The crypto, they're going to flourish. The private markets, what we're going to see is the following. We're going to see for the first time for broker dealers, once again, in companies, issuers, to be able to accept that form of payment. It's going to be, we're back to that again, which is great because there are billions of dollars out there that people want to transact. So for the crypto holders, you will have another venue now, a regulated venue, meaning that you're using your regulated currency in a regulated fashion in order to receive a regulated security, so you can further your investment. The other part that we anticipate that will occur is that we are going to see some creative models, but they're regulated. Not this free-for-all where only a few people know how it works and then they rip everybody off. At the end of the day, it's all a Ponzi scheme of one form or the other. We're going to see these models re-emerging, but compliant. And why? Because it's a great idea. I think, when people ask me about NFTs, do I love them? I think they're fantastic. I love it. I mean, as a collector, I think it's a fantastic. Look at art. Look at all these different things. So I don't think there's the issue of, does the market not want it? I think the issue is, how do we do it in such a way that it's compliant and it's protecting the investor? Because here is we can finally say this now that we didn't say before, and that is that when crypto was all around and hip and all that, nobody talked about protecting the investor, because supposedly the investor was being protected because they changed
somehow
immutability, the immutability, you're protected, it's all transparent. But let's face it, if your best friend is one of those rare, 1 in a million mathematicians, then I believe you did know where your money is. If you didn't, you weren't the ones that knew where it was. And that's the tricky part here. Finally, the investors are losing money in ways that nobody thought was even possible. Hacking's been around, but it's not just the hacking, it's just the scams where they jump in and they think that, oh, I'm investing in this and I'm going to get a return on my investment, I'm protected, because that's what they've been used to with everything else they've done. And then they find out, no protection. So, by the way, interesting thing, forget about blockchain for a moment. I'll bring everybody back to the very first publicly traded company in the world. And it's funny, no, not so much funny, but it's educational because it reminds us of our human flawedness. And it's really important because it's one of the examples that is taught to every student in business and in the capital markets. The very first publicly traded company in the world came from the Netherlands, and it was the tulips. And people go, what? Yep, the tulips. It was the world's largest Ponzi scheme at the time, and it was the very first publicly traded company, and it became the very first publicly traded company that went bust. And so what did the world do when that happened? So at that time, it was a free-for-all. There were no rules, and rules were implemented, okay? And over the decades, different infractions occurred. The biggest two infractions in the 20th century and 21st century that have occurred, that is in everybody's mind here, is companies you will recognize. One is called Bre-X, the other one is called Sino Forest, and the other one is called Enron. And so in each of these times when the billions and trillions of dollars was lost by investors, what did the regulators do? Immediately change and the rules in order to protect the investors. Bernie Madoff, another one. What do the regulators do?
Absolutely.
Immediately implement the safety nets and all that. So
yep.
What's happening in crypto is not a knee-jerk reaction. It is the status model of what regulators do. They're there to protect the market. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, especially when people have lost their money. For those who have made money, kudos to you. But unfortunately, for everyone that made money, 10 others lost it. And unfortunately, those are the ones screaming to politicians and so on. So we want it to be this way, but we need that clarity. So as I've said before, chaos, which is what we've been in, has brought that clarity. Clarity is, okay, this is what it looks like. Okay, and now clarity makes everybody understand that we need compliance, and we need to be compliant to instill trust, because that investor out there today is reading more about the scams and people losing their money than the ones that are good. So the only way that everyone is going to get market adoption is that it expands beyond. And in order to do that, I'm going to bring something up. I was just watching a documentary last night, and the documentary was based on Michael Jackson receiving his very first award from the music label that he was with. And it was really interesting that it said, I know for everybody, Michael Jackson is like 30, 40 years ago. 30, 40 years ago, when he received his first album, #1 and all that, when the label wanted to give him the award, or the industry wanted to give him the award, one of the insistence that Michael Jackson wanted, he wanted a white actress or white actor to give him the award. And it was Jane Fonda that gave Michael Jackson his music award for reaching the label. And why he did that is because at that time there was still the stigma that he was this black artist, and by getting this, he was elevated to a different level. And I think this is, and again, what does that have to do with crypto? It's the same, people. It's the same.
Exactly.
Crypto's been sitting here. We've lost the trust of the market. The market is saying, I don't want to near it. I don't want to go near it. Banks don't want to touch it. Now, how do you bring it back? Well, you bring in leadership, and you bring in people that been there, done that. Look at Richard, the new CEO of Binance. Richard transformed the ADGM in Abu Dhabi. Everybody knows him. He is reputable. He is compliant. Everything he does is above board. A Singaporean who has transformed the Middle East. Now, the new owner of FTX is potentially going to be the ex-president of the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, what better credibility to a market leader like FTX and Binance to have that kind of leadership come in? Yes, it's like every company, the oil companies, when they were bad, what do? They changed leadership and ownership, and they move forward, and the brands are still there. Shell, oil companies, they've all been bad. They've all done it, but they've transformed. This one just happened quicker in front of our eyes rather than decades. And what is it going to do? It's going to create a level of trust. These people can open doors in banks, and people like yourself, Kiran, and me, to say, hey, we're open for business, and we're going to do it compliantly. And you're going to say, yes, you are. We're in. We believe you. We want to be part of that. Versus, like I said, the other model. So I'm very excited about this. I see a dramatic shift in 2024. And for those who have been predicting that, Bitcoin will be at X number of dollars where it is today, I think you're on the right path. But these are I believe now we got some fundamentals to go with it to validate that this will happen.
No, absolutely. It's really interesting, and I just want to share a couple of really episodic thoughts with everyone. Back in the days when I used to trade futures and commodity futures back in the day, there's one very interesting thing that I learned. I had a colleague of mine in one of the companies I worked, and he and a few people joined like a fund group, advisory group for trading commodities. And one fine day, I was just walking by his office, and I said, and he was grinning from ear to ear. He looked very excited, and I said, "Hey, what's up?" And I knew he was trading, in commodities. And I said, "Did you make out big? And you must have hit a jackpot, right? You look so happy." And the guy said, "No, Kiran, I lost $5,000. I lost pretty much all of my stake in, I lost $5,000, which is big money in those days. But he said, wow, what a ride, what a ride. And if there's one thing that I've learned, from my trading background is that boring is good. It's not exciting, right? But you can make a ton of money by being the most boring guy, right? And I've done that using option writing strategies, which is really the most boring thing you can ever think about, but it just brings in the money like clockwork. And at the end of the day, you look at a stock that's gone absolutely nowhere. It's been sort of flat throughout, and you end up making 72% on something like that and say, wow, that's pretty cool. But it's not, you cannot brag about it. And the reason I bring up this episode, Oscar, is that in this whole cryptocurrency space, in this, all the things that are happening now, there's been a lot of hype about excitement, and people get excited. And like my colleague, they're excited, but they lost their money. But hey, they're still excited, right? And I think now we're seeing this shift to an audience that's saying now, okay, excitement is for Vegas. I want to make money. And if it's the old boring way, that's fine. But we do need innovative products, right, in this whole space. And we're seeing very fascinating business models arise. And those are exciting. But what's not exciting and shouldn't be exciting is all this hype about nothing but crypto with no value back into any of this stuff, right? So like you, I'm 100% positive. And there's one other thought I want to share. As you were talking, Oscar, I was reminded of several years ago, I read an article about forest fires, the California forest fires and everything. And the most surprising thing, I was looking at these forest fires and I read this phrase, they have to manage the forest fires. And I'm saying, what the heck do you mean by that? Put out the fire. What do you mean by manage the fire? Well, it seems, and I read this in an article, it just blew my mind. It seems that forest fires up to a certain point are actually good for the healthy economy, the forest economy, right? In the ecosystem. And I was saying that's interesting. It clears out the dead wood, the brushwood, all of the crappy stuff out, and it rejuvenates the shoots, the tops all get burnt out, and then you'll see a fresh crop of new forest coming up. And it was apparently a good thing. And that's the reason why the forest management, land management, government bodies, they don't go and put out the fire like right away. They let it kind of burn a little bit, and it is a refreshing thing to do, right? And I think that pretty much the same thing has been happening in, the private capital market space as well. In the kind of, so once you get the fire out, you'll say, okay, now how should we do this much more cleanly? How do you put all the desirable trees that actually work together as an ecosystem, right? In our models now, right? It's NFTs with value behind it, with true artists happening, commercial real estate and so on, right? I mean, so now we're seeing the shift to value, I think.
I agree. I think the value will come out, and more importantly, it won't be just kind of that flash element, any grandiose idea. I've spoken to a number of people that have said, I don't look at deals anymore that just say, hey, I'm just creating a crypto, currency, and it's going to be this and it'll be backed by that. People now know some of the fundamentals. We use words like fundamental questions that we need to ask. So,
yes.
Overall, I think that, some of the questions that I'm being asked right now is, are there going to be any legal challenges to how we move forward? And the answer is no. There are no legal challenges in how we're going to be moving forward. Another one, is there going to be new regulations? And the answer, once again, is no. Commissioner Gessler has said no. They've said it over and over again. The regulations are already there. And I think this is the part that it's really important that, this has been a 10-year run on crypto since the beginning to where we are now. And it's been one that you've got to applaud yourself, kudos, you managed to, and, there are those who are following the regulations. You don't hear their brands very often. And then there's the ones that do whatever they want and look where they go. And so people say, well, we need rules in crypto. They're not going to change the rules. They are not going to remove the things that everybody else needs to follow in order. I mean, look, how would you like it if they changed the rules on the banks right now? So instead of 250,000, you're protected, there'll be no protection. How would you like that? Are you going to put money? How would you like it if they don't protect you with your landlord and for those who rent? And I'm sure not everybody owns. I mean, what is it? 85% of Americans rent. So which means that if there are no rules to protect you, okay, how about this? You're gonna love this one. This is my favorite. How would you like the rules to be changed for employee or employer? I'm sure the employers would be happy that to do whatever we want, but there's consequences. So another word, you're asking for the removal of things that have taken people, the very people that you are trying to get them to engage in your business, to take those rules away, and that's not going to happen. In fact, I would say more would come. But sorry, Kiran, you were going to add.
So I was going to double click on one aspect of that though. The regulations have been what they have been in essence, right? There's a little small things that will change, such as the limits. The limits can increase or decrease or whatever, right? That's fine. But in a sense, the Jobs Act regulations have been pretty steady. I mean, I personally didn't think there was any controversy around that one. But I know, so you're right, the rules, there won't be new regulations and rules necessarily, but I think there'll be more regulatory scrutiny though, right? And I think that's
100%. And if you and I go back to 2016, 2017, and for those who are listening in today, you may remember countries like Switzerland, the Swiss, and Gibraltar, and God knows what other jurisdiction that was. Oh, come on, Oscar, I'm going to go there because look, they're more friendly, they're more crypto friendly, they're what friendly? They're gone. Money rules the world, and the money's still being ruled by the sources where it's at. So and if the US currency isn't so important, and here's the thing that I give back to the entire crypto, so why do you peg everything to the US dollar? Because that's the currency that everyone follows. So so I do see its value. I'm not diminishing here that it doesn't have value. I see it in other jurisdictions where the value is even more important. Let's say you live in Argentina, you live in Venezuela, Colombia, Nicaragua, El Salvador. You live in countries where the currency is jumping up and down. Would it be worth it for you to take whatever you get paid and put it in crypto? The answer is yes. It makes sense because the fluctuation in your currency and all that at any given moment is so onerous that this is your safety net. That's what it means, by the way, a complete world where people are not protected. So I get it. Exactly. But when you live in a world like the rest of the world, the Western world and all that, where there are protections in place, you cannot bring that chaotic environment and hope that people will, because all they do is rob, right? That's all this was. This was masqueraded in some ways as a robbery. Sorry, go on.
No. Actually, a few years ago, I think I was interviewing a candidate from Venezuela, right? And not for this, but for a separate thing. And I said, so we pay in US dollars, and they said, no, can I, and he said, no, I accept in Bitcoin also. And I said, oh, really? So you've been being paid in Bitcoin, right? So far, you're a big believer in, and they said, oh yeah, absolutely. And I said, so what percentage of your contract pay are you actually getting in Bitcoin? And he said, oh yeah, I get up to like 5% of my pay in Bitcoin, right? So that was his testimonial. 5% of his paycheck came to him in Bitcoin, and he thought that was his confidence level. And I'm going, wait a minute. So you're telling me that 95% of your pay is actually in the fiat currency, right? So that didn't gel much with me. So even in a country where there was a tremendous amount of chaos, people still were hesitant to, go the 100%, nothing but Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency route for that matter. So my question to most people is that, would you put your grandmother's savings in whatever cryptocurrency you're following, right? And if the answer is no, it's very clear cut, right? I mean, there's no recourse, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of, people are getting more savvy. I think, Oscar, I'd like to kind of get your take on this one as well. So that in the past, you and I, we have actually interacted with exchanges that have been set up in other jurisdictions. And I think the main motivation for that is that the other jurisdictions were more friendly, meaning, of course, they had less protections and less regulations and less et cetera, and they were deemed to be more friendly for people creating these exchanges. So that part, I mean, do you see that part coming down? I mean, are those exchanges going to be going away? Or do you see those other jurisdictions, many other countries, for example, beefing up their own regulatory oversight to follow the US? And you mentioned, Oscar, at one point, I mean, US is considered to be the gold standard for regulatory oversight. Yeah, we make mistakes here, right? But we are also quick to correct some of those mistakes, right?
Yeah, the other jurisdictions that, let's look at Gibraltar, for instance, and there's another one in that area at the moment, escapes me, but that little open window they created only lasted for a little bit. And how did it come in? The United States and the rest of the world cut it off from the banking market. So in other words, if you're a country and you want to operate with the rest of the world and the banking world, they want you to be following the rules. So in the end, I knew a few operators that were going to launch there, and they never did because they go, all the rules got harder. So in other words, if the conversation is going to start, I want it somewhere easier, then my question is, so you want to find a way to scam people from money? There is no other, no, following regulations, it gets too expensive. The answer is no. How can it be too expensive when you're trying to protect you and the investors? It's not. There is no, that if technology is really the game changer, this is where I've been really having a problem with all this, where people say, well, listen, Oscar, blockchain technology is going to help reduce the cost. Great. If it's going to help reduce the cost, then we can all agree that I didn't say I needed 10 people, I just needed one, but that person needs to be a qualified individual with and all that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong. Using efficiencies is perfect. But to say that, you're going to go to another jurisdiction because this one is too hard, I find that, it's insulting, number one. And number two, the only reason you want to do that is because you're trying to do something illegal. It always comes down to someone is trying to do something illegal here, or, it comes down to, well, in order for me to do this, I got to pay this guy, and there's only one other way to pay him. I got to put it over there. Okay, so you're trying to do something illegally. Well, it's not illegal. Well, it is, because if you were trying to do that in the United States, it is illegal. So this is kind of the thing that it's been misunderstood by everyone, what it means to to be fully compliant, and not only being fully compliant, where the benefits are. So all those jurisdictions, you don't hear about Switzerland anymore. You don't hear about any of those as no, those things are now gone. And what does it mean gone?
Yeah.
It means that whatever little glitch you found, or little eon to come in and think that you can operate out there, those little loopholes are removed. And foreign ownership, I mean, Singapore, during the ICOs, an independent report showed that 80-90% of the companies were coming from Singapore. What did the Singapore government do? Boom, it automatically shut down foreign ownership, and it required a $30,000 fee in order to be applied, and it held the lawyers responsible for creating the companies to make sure that, and if you didn't, if Singapore, if you break the law, you don't just get a slap in the hand, you go to prison. So, I mean, you go to prison there for chewing gum or leaving newspapers in a bench. So believe me, they take this. So Singapore, you don't hear their name anymore in the crypto in fact, everything you hear about Singapore now is fully regulated exchanges, and these exchanges are going to flourish one jurisdiction at a time. It's not going to be this global dominance overnight and boom, boom, boom. That's why Binance disappeared out of Canada, the United States. And their excuse was, it's not feasible. No, it's not that it's not feasible. It's that you want to operate illegally. Richard is going to bring all that back. That's why good leadership comes in, and he is going to put it back where it's going to re-enter Canada. Why? Because Binance is a good product. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just bad leadership. FTX, the same thing. FTX is a great brand, great idea, concept. It just didn't put all the security. I mean, you don't put in, you put professionals in place as a CFO, you put the chief compliance officers, you put all the people who've been there,
Exactly.
done that. And if you didn't, you would hire the professionals to guide you along the way. Yes, I also know that there are some law firms that can also take some of the brunt of this, and they won't. I mean, the same way that we tell clients when they're doing raising capital, and how does this fit into what we do in the private markets? I'll bring it in really quickly here, is that when you're raising capital, choosing your partners, choosing your broker dealer, choosing your technology partner, your lawyer, your auditor, it's just as important as the success of your raise. Because at the end of the day, after you've successfully raised your money, and if there was anything done wrong, guess who pays the price? You, the company. You'll have to return the money back like ICOs did. You're the one that's going to go to prison. You're the one that's going to get fined. And you're going to say, but my lawyer, my broker dealer, know that. That's right. They did nothing. They stood by. They took their fees, and they're going to play dumb. When the regulators go to them, it was the decision by the company. They made the decision. We didn't guide them in either way. So it's really important to understand that's exactly what's happening in the crypto space as well. I'm not going to call any of them out by name or anything like that, but the point is they also need to take that responsibility, and some of them have done so by letting go some of those partners, and those partners are on their own, running their own, because they also see the risk. And the private markets, we're going through the same issue, but it all comes down to the same 4 basic elements. And never forget this. This is always a clear indication when an industry is growing and it's going through its paces, and blockchain and the capital markets are coming to an intersection. And that intersection is now coming even faster because the chaos and the clarity that we've undergone, it puts only 1 or 2 things into people's mind. I need to be 100% compliant in order to build trust with the investors and everybody I'm working with. If I don't have those 2, everything else is out the door. And there are companies out there in the space that still don't get it. But the important thing is that the industry, the lawyers and the auditors finally do, and the companies seeking to use this form of technology for their business or capital raising, they're starting to ask them. And the warning signs are, yeah, we're looking into this to see how we can do it, but it's not necessary. That's warning number 1. Number 2, I don't think it's important. That's what you should be saying is getting a partner and say, yeah, we've gone through this. We went through the SEC. We got it qualified. We're ready to operate. We're fully compliant, and you can trust our infrastructure. We only deal with regulated people, and that is where we are today. That is whether you're in a crypto market, in the crypto market, running a crypto exchange, or you're in the private capital markets where we are at KoreChain, providing an infrastructure for people to issue NFTs and security tokens and digital securities, fully compliant and all that. That's it. That's the difference between what still remains and what it means to operate compliantly.
Absolutely. And one of the things that kind of struck me, Oscar, as you were talking about this one, is when we have this conversation around infrastructure of trust, we don't necessarily say trust is simply narrowly defined as being regulatorily compliant, right? It's also being able to operate ethically. And sometimes things can be legal because the law doesn't say anything about it, or kind of gives you a different interpretation, but you can still do things unethically, immorally, using somebody else's data in a wrong way and things that it's not meant to be, right? And going around the CEOs. I mean, there are so many things that can happen which can be deemed unethical just because they have not been spelled out in a contract or the regulation doesn't cover it, doesn't make it right to do that, right? So my feeling, Oscar, I don't know if you have a take on this one, is as we go forward with this stuff, the question of trust, the definition of what trust actually means expands to not just being regulatorily compliant, that is the bare minimum standard And on top of that, you have ethical behavior, governance, which are completely different, right? I mean, we need that as well.
We do. You know, I'm not a predictor of things or anything like that, and I only go by my gut, and who know you, I know I got a bigger gut than others, but my gut tells me, it directs me, and it hasn't failed me yet. And going back 6-7 months ago, I started writing about chaos, clarity, compliance, and trust. And trust has to be more than what it is. Trust, trust did not. We can't rely on technology to trust. And because, as I said earlier, human beings are the ones programming it and telling it what to do. So therefore, that will take time. That will take decades and decades for us to get there. But there's other levels of trust that we're now starting to see that are just as important in business, and that's ethical trust. 14 years ago, when I set out on this journey, there were many rules, things that we put in place to make sure that we would never cross. We're not a FINRA broker-dealer. We're not a FINRA secondary ATS. We are not these things. And therefore, we never, ever had our hand out and said, please, we need our 1% or anything like that. And see, that's a compliance element. So that you can trust us that we will always follow compliance. And then there was another thing that we were bothered by, seeing the private markets, that the minute you would come to me and say, hey, Oscar, can you recommend me a lawyer or an auditor or this? And you go, yes, of course, I'm happy to do so. And you would do so, but then you would be at the other side of the hand, and you'd be with your hand out again. And
with the referral fees.
Correct. And that's not compliance anymore. That's now ethical. And for us, we made those decisions that we would never, ever cross any of those lines. And then the third line is that you've entrusted me with your information. I mean, this is probably the biggest trust of all, right?
Absolutely.
The biggest trust of all is you've given us your information. I'm not going to say personal information. I'm just going to say information. And all of a sudden, I'm using it to sell it. I'm using it to gain further financial gain on our own. And all those things are now becoming critical. We're seeing a company today being blown up, like a unicorn, overnight being blown apart purely because it didn't do anything uncompliantly. Nope. It didn't do anything illegally. Nope.
Yep.
It did everything compliantly, but it broke its trust with the clients and everybody it deals with, because they entrusted them. So this word trust is going to be big. And for those who are listening, there's some big names that I'll never forget. Mr. William Dima, one of the creators of the ICD.D in both Canada and the United States, one of the fathers of corporate governance after the Enron collapse. And when I would do my sit downs with him, it was really interesting that my times that I shared with him, a lot of the things that he would teach me had nothing to do with what you learned in school, your PhD, your master's degree. He would give me examples of what he called the pink elephant in the room. So in a boardroom, there's always a pink elephant, and the pink elephant is, there's a problem, and who's going to say it's there, and who's going to point it out, and who's going to call it out, and that would give him everything he would need to know, even if you passed the ICD.D and you got that. But if you weren't ready to do your job and do it professionally and ethically at that time, he would know that your character was flawed in that manner. And I'm not perfect. I'm not going to say that, but I've learned. I would say the last 15 years of my journey as an entrepreneur, I attribute it to people like William Dima, people like Peter Day, Glenn Killing, and many others who gave me what they valued most in their day-to-day when dealing with people and dealing with and one of the things that I ended up learning, with William Dima and Glenn Killing, they had this level of trust with people that they trusted them. And people like them, they were never with a handout. They had no expectation, anything like that. That was so amazing to see that for the first time in my career, where everywhere else, whenever I asked for help, people would have their hand out immediately. So I know what is this deal with blockchain. Well, whether you realize it or not, blockchain is flawed in this manner that it is filled with all of this. It's filled with these layers of that how the money moves around and how people shouldn't on a compliant way getting these funds and they shouldn't be. And and there are many people who are just operating unethically. Let's just face it, pumping
Of
and
course,
dumping things that they
of
and
course.
and that level of trust is going to move away. So I think we, we've grown. Everybody's growing up. Gen Z, Gen X, whatever generation you're part of. Technology is technology. Human being, you can't remove it out of the equation, and therefore these things are going to be important. But overall, the private markets, the blockchain market are going to flourish. I mark my words here. They're going to flourish in 2024
Absolutely.
and onward because we have crossed a major chasm. We've crossed it. We survived it. I think this is the other thing that everybody should be listening to. What happened with FTX and Binance, I feel horribly for those who lost. I do, but I believe most of you will get it back.
Mhm.
But most importantly, it survived it. Grant, that's
Yeah,
the important thing. It survived it.
it
It
is.
shows you how strong it is. And the
Mhm.
fact that it's surviving and other people want to buy it, I mean, that's what the
Yeah,
bidding war is right now for FTX. It shows
that's
you
right.
that there's a market demand for this. And it means when you put the right ownership and leadership to it, imagine
Yep.
what it's going to do. A year from now, we're going to be saying, holy macro, guess what? I actually went to, a Starbucks and bought a cup of coffee with ease, ping, using my crypto, or I bought a car, I bought a house, I bought clothing, I paid my rent, I paid my employee. I mean, isn't that what everybody wanted? Well, this is where we're heading to. We're finally moving in that direction. This asset class or this commodity is moving in such a direction that it can be fluid. And why? Because we're putting all the protocols in place in order to protect everyone involved.
Absolutely, absolutely. I see a lot of positive going forward where the blockchain is a way to cement and secure what I would like to call a very fiduciary type of relationship between the participants in this space, right? I mean, I think that's the key, and I 100% agree with you. So I'm really excited about stuff that's going to happen. We have been in conversations with many different business models now, but we always have this thought about how can we make this more compliant? How can we make this ethical? How can we prove that this is compliant and ethical, right? It's being able to prove the fiduciary nature of transactions. So, I mean, that's a big play
Yeah,
for
and
blockchain.
it's going to be continued. Look, it's just the starting. It's not
Yeah,
perfect. It's
yeah.
going to go through, but this is the starting point that is going to help everyone. It's going to, when they say this is going to get great market adoption, ladies and
Mhm.
gentlemen, you can start saying that now. You're there. We're all there. And that market adoption, it means, look, the private markets is going to be adopting it. It's going to bring it in. Why? Because we're going to have the assurances that are needed in order to keep everyone compliant. Because everybody in this ecosystem, the lawyers, the auditors, the broker dealer, the issuer, everyone has compliance rules. We have banks involved. We have payment
Yeah.
providers acquired. So when you have an entire ecosystem that's regulated and this comes in and it's coming regular, it makes it really simple. Then from there, you can start copying it into many other things, healthcare, this and that. So I see it as as a positive. I see it as where the mass adoption starts beginning, and it will have problems. Make no mistakes. It will.
Oh, yeah,
There will be
of
another.
course.
I mean, what did I tell you? The very first publicly traded company, it
Yeah,
blew up. People used to say
that's
it'll never happen again. It did. It has happened again and again and again. I'll never forget when they said that after Brex, there won't be another situation like that. And it's true. In the mining sector, they corrected it. We won't see that again. Why? Because we have independent reports, 43101 and so on. But then again, Sino Forest, the forest went missing. Oh my God. um, how do you lose trees? Okay, but you did. So each time we see that, we have regulators and stock exchanges and everybody, you know, the stock exchanges, I want everybody to understand, stock exchanges are not, they self-regulate, they create the rules for their market, and they're smart enough to say, okay, we need these rules, not just because the regulators, we need these rules because we need to protect the market and we want a vibrant market to grow. And so we're going to see companies like Coinbase and others that are going to be taking a leadership role and not just, you know, pushing it out there in the boundaries all the time. Yeah, they're going to push it out there, but they're going to, it's going to become more towards this arena. You know, recently I saw Coinbase coming up with a new product, which I thought it was a joke. It really was. I'm going, okay, the entire market is moving one way and you come up with this. They dropped it really quickly because I'm not really sure what they're trying to attract. They have such a great brand. They're doing really well, and they can take leadership now. They can, being compliant is not the end of the world. And I know if you got legacy issues, you're going to pay the piper sooner or later. But for everyone that's here today, know this chasm we're crossing is massive. 2024 outlook is amazing, both from the crypto and the private capital markets and the impact it will have. It will bring in new investors. It will make it more fluid. So the positive impact. And there will be issues down the line, but they won't be as impactful as this. This big impact is now done. It's unraveled itself, and it's now time for us to move forward. And I think it's pretty exciting. I mean, I'd like to hear your wrap up on this, Kiran.
It's 100%. It's been an evolution over many business models. You know, people have made mistakes, some of them willful and deliberate, some of them accidentally. But as you move and mature in this space, right? And my personal view is that the innovation in the private capital markets is going to be phenomenal. Because there are many reasons for that, which we won't go into right now. It'll be much better than the public markets. And you know, I know blockchain has a predominant role in ensuring this whole fiduciary and compliance aspect of this one. So I'm all in. Have always been all in. You know, we have always been in with this, and looking forward to a very great year ahead.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. And once again, we're really excited that you were able to make it today. We obviously have more events planned for 2024. Stay tuned for the invitations as they're coming out. The next event we have is tokenization in the private markets. Why so much confusion? Look forward to seeing you the next time. Till then, have a great, fantastic week, and let's have an amazing 2024.